Nikola Tesla died on January 7, 1943, in his room at the New Yorker hotel. He died in poverty, without a cent. The man who invented alternating current, without which not a single electrical device in your home would exist right now, died without money for food. But here is what happened in the hours immediately following his death. FBI agents entered his room and seized absolutely everything, every sheet of paper, every notebook, every document. All of it was immediately classified as secret. And then, the US government selected one specific person to evaluate these papers, to decide what in them had value and what did not. This person's name was John G. Trump, professor of electrical engineering at MIT and the uncle of Donald Trump. It was he, after 3 days of review, who wrote in his official report that Tesla's papers were of a predominantly speculative, philosophical and promotional character and represented no significant value, after which part of those papers disappeared forever, and the rest remain classified to this day, 80 years after the death of a man who had nothing of value. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented fact from the declassified FBI files, and it is only the beginning of the story. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear, 3 specific facts that official history has never assembled together, will change how you look at Tesla and at exactly what was taken from him. Let's start with the question nobody asks publicly. A man with more than 300 patents had nothing of value in his papers? A man whose discoveries formed the foundation of every power station, every radio transmitter, every wireless data transmission system that exists today, wrote nothing of value. Let's look at what Tesla was actually working on in the final years of his life, because what he was researching is precisely what disappeared from his papers first. In the final years of his life, Tesla was working on what he called his dynamic theory of gravity, not simply a physical theory, a theory that unified gravity, electromagnetism, and consciousness as manifestations of one and the same fundamental field. He called this field the ether, and this is exactly where official science declared him mad. Because in 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment showed that the ether could not be detected as a stationary medium, after which physics officially declared it non-existent. Tesla disagreed. He said that the abandonment of the ether concept was the greatest mistake of modern physics, and he had reasons to say so. Specific reasons, experimental reasons, documented reasons. In 1905, Tesla patented the idea that the Earth is a resonant circuit, without computers, without modern equipment. Relying solely on theoretical calculations, he determined the resonant frequency of the Earth as 6.8 Hertz. In 1952, 7 years after Tesla's death, German physicist Winfried Otto Schumann conducted independent measurements and obtained 7.83 Hertz. A man who died in poverty without modern equipment was off by less than 15%. This is today called the Schumann resonance, not the Tesla resonance, even though it was Tesla who discovered this phenomenon 47 years earlier. But here is what nobody mentions when they talk about the Schumann resonance. This frequency, 7.83 Hertz, coincides with the alpha rhythm of the human brain, the range in which the brain operates during relaxed wakefulness and meditation. Tesla knew about this coincidence, and it was precisely this that he wrote about in the papers the FBI classified first. Not a deadly weapon, the fact that human consciousness and the Earth operate on the same frequency, and that this is not a coincidence. Now, the second fact, the one that official history describes as a strange mistake of a genius. In 1899, Tesla was in his laboratory in Colorado Springs, late at night, alone. He was conducting experiments in wireless energy transmission, the very ones that later confirmed his theory of Earth resonance, and at some point, his sensitive receiver picked up a signal, not random interference, a rhythmic signal, repeating with a clear structure. Tesla recorded it in his diary, which survived partially, as a sequence: 1 signal, pause, 2 signals, pause, 3 signals, and he wrote, these are his direct words, documented and published. My first observations positively terrified me, as there was present in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural, and I was alone in my laboratory at night. The changes I noted were taking place periodically, and with such a clear suggestion of number and order that they were not traceable to any cause then known to me. This is not an interpretation, this is a direct quote from Tesla's documented records, published, verified. He wrote that the signal might be coming from Mars or another planet. The scientific community mocked him, declared this episode proof of his mental deterioration, but here is what happened 100 years later. In 2003, two researchers, Kenneth Coram and James Coram, published an academic paper in which they analyzed Tesla's equipment and the conditions of that experiment. Their conclusion was specific. The equipment Tesla used was sensitive precisely to the kilometer wave range in which Jupiter operates, and the signals from Jupiter, documented by modern instruments, have exactly the structure that Tesla described. One signal, two signals, three signals. Tesla was in the right place with the right equipment at the right time. The scientific community that mocked him simply didn't yet have the instruments to understand what he had heard. Now, the third fact, the one that ties everything together, and that nobody has ever assembled into one story until now. John Trump, the uncle of Donald Trump who evaluated Tesla's papers as nothing of value, did something else. Donald Trump, during his presidential campaign, repeatedly mentioned his Uncle John, and in one interview said the following. These are his direct words. "My uncle used to tell me about nuclear before nuclear was nuclear." Think about that. The man who spent 3 days studying Tesla's papers and wrote that there was nothing of value in them was telling his nephew about nuclear technology before it became public knowledge. Where did he know this from? From the papers he declared worthless? From classified materials he saw during the evaluation that were never fully declassified? This is not a rhetorical question. This is a question that has no official answer. Because part of Tesla's papers, declassified in 2016, following Freedom of Information Act requests, remains blocked. 250 pages were declassified. Nobody knows how many pages remain classified 80 years later. For the papers of a man who had nothing of value. Now, Wardenclyffe Tower. Because it is the key to understanding why Tesla's papers were classified. In 1901, Tesla began construction of a tower on Long Island, officially for wireless transmission of messages across the Atlantic. But in his records, those that were subsequently partially declassified, Tesla described its real function differently. He wrote that the tower was meant to interact with the resonant field of the Earth, not simply transmit signals through the air, but use the Earth itself as a conductor, turn the planet into a global source of free energy available at any point in the world, without wires, without meters, without any possibility of monetization. The project was financed by J.P. Morgan, one of the wealthiest men in America at the time, whose fortune was built on monopolistic control over energy infrastructure. When Morgan understood what Tesla was actually building, he immediately terminated the funding and used his influence to ensure that nobody else would finance the project either. The tower was demolished in 1917, officially so that German submarines would not use it as a landmark. Tesla lost everything and spent the remaining 26 years of his life in growing poverty, dying alone in 1943, after which the FBI immediately took his papers, and the uncle of the future president wrote that there was nothing of value in them. Now, what Tesla actually said about the nature of reality, what he wrote in the final years of his life, what was in the classified papers, he said that consciousness is a resonant phenomenon, that it arises where organized matter begins to resonate with the field that permeates all of space, and that this resonance does not cease with the death of the physical structure, because the field exists independently of it. He said, and these are his direct words recorded and published during his lifetime, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists." A man with 300 patents, a man who experimentally confirmed Earth resonance 47 years before another scientist discovered it, a man who recorded signals that a century later scientists identified as real signals from Jupiter. This man said that the brain is a receiver. That consciousness exists independently of the physical body, and that the death of the body is not the end of consciousness, because consciousness was never exclusively physical. This is not a religious statement. It is an engineering description of the mechanics of reality from a man who understood those mechanics more deeply than anyone else in the 20th century. And it is precisely these papers that the government took first. Precisely these notes that remain classified to this day. Not the weapons blueprints. Those were declassified. The notes about the nature of consciousness and the field he called the ether. The ones that the uncle of the future president declared worthless, and then told that president about before it became public knowledge. One final question. The one I want you to ask yourself after all of this. 3 facts. First, Tesla determined Earth resonance without equipment with 15% accuracy, and this frequency coincides with the frequency of the human brain. Second, he recorded signals that modern science identified as real signals from space, 100 years before it had the instruments to confirm it. Third, his papers were taken by a man who then told the future president of the United States about nuclear technology before its public discovery, and those papers remain classified to this day. The question is not whether this was a conspiracy. The question is, what exactly was in those papers that requires classification 80 years later? Write in the comments what you think, because that is precisely the question Tesla wanted us to be asking, and precisely why his papers are still classified.